upon prayer, about how to pray. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And we'll stop there. We saw last week, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And where there is a prayer where there is sincere prayer for forgiveness, there will be a fear of committing more sin. And where there is a sincere prayer forgiveness, there will also be a determination and a resolve against sin. And there's a connection here. There's two petitions. We see, forgive us our debt, and then lead us not into temptation. And then the second petition after forgive us our debts is, but deliver us from evil. And it shows us that though the sinner is forgiven, though the child of God is forgiven, there's still the danger of committing more sin. And we're all very much aware of that. There's not only the danger, there is the reality that more sin will be committed. We see this as a request. The spirit behind this request is one who is fearful of sin, fearful of committing sin. Again, the request is twofold. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. So it is a prayer for preservation. It is a prayer for protection from that which leads to sin, which of course is temptation, and a prayer from a rescue from actual sin. So the request is, lead us not into temptation, that is, protect us from everything that leads to sin. Keep us from that which leads to sin. And when we fall into sin, deliver us from evil. So in the request, you'll notice there is no dictation to God as to how He would grant the request. It's just, lead us not into temptation, let us not go there, and deliver us from evil. No instruction to God upon how to accomplish this. It's just a request that God would do whatever needs to be done in order to grant the request, in order to keep us from sin. It should be whatever God has to do. Whatever God does is fine. So it's a request of trust in God. People that instruct God in their praying really lack trust in God. You should be able to take a matter to God, just leave it with Him, and just trust that God is going to do what's right. God is going to do what is best. And that's true concerning ourselves. That's true concerning others as well. So in this prayer, to be preserved and protected from that which leads to sin, and to be delivered from the presence of sin. It is a prayer for God's preventing grace. There are many branches of God's grace. And there is such a thing as preventing grace. Lead us not into temptation. God, prevent us from temptation. So it is a prayer for God's preventing grace. It has the sense of do not permit us to be led into temptation to sin. Do not permit us to go in that direction. And it is a plea that God would grant grace to escape the attempts to draw towards sin. That's what temptation is. It is an attempt to draw us towards sin. God tempteth no man. So it is a prayer that God would grant us grace to escape the attempts to draw towards sin. Now the temptation referred to, there are various temptations in the Bible. Sometimes it refers to trials, testings. This, of course, is a solicitation to evil, to sin. A solicitation to sin. And this comes from a variety of sources, and we have to realize this. Temptation comes first and foremost from within. There would be no temptation were it not for a problem within. So, temptations come from within. Notice in the book of James, chapter 1, verses 14 through verse 16, we have the dynamics, if you will, of temptation and of sin. Every man is tempted. When? Very important word. When. So it's going to tell us when temptation takes place. Every man is tempted when he is drawn away. And then notice the next phrase, of his own lust. There's the problem. If man did not have this lust, if man did not have this desire, he could not be tempted. But he has this lust, he has this desire for sin, for that which is wrong. And every man is tempted when he's drawn away. That is, there's a battle going on between his fleshly desires of his own lust and enticed. And then in verse 15, then when, there it is again, when lust hath conceived, when this sinful desire is brought forth, it bringeth forth sin. So the root problem is this lust. The root problem is this sinful desire. If we do not have the desire within us, we're not tempted. We're not tempted. We're only tempted toward what we desire. Therefore, again, Christ could not be tempted with sin. He had nothing in himself to desire what Satan was presenting. There was no desire. But within us, we have this sinful desire. And we have to realize this. In verse 16, do not err, my beloved brethren. So when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. So you have desire, you have sin, you have the consequences of sin, and then the instruction, do not err, my beloved brethren. So this has the meaning of every person is tempted, when he or she is drawn away, there's a pulling away, and enticed by their own evil desire. So sinful flesh is the root problem to all temptation. Whatever other source temptation may come from, the root problem is our sinful flesh, is our sinful desires. Nothing could tempt us if there were nothing within us to desire the point of temptation. Therefore, we are bidden in Romans 13:14 not to make provision for sinful flesh, because that's what's tempted, is our flesh. Do not make provision. Do not give sinful flesh that opportunity. And then we're told in 1 Peter 2 verse 11 to abstain from fleshly lust, or to abstain from the desires of sinful flesh. Flesh is the problem. Sinful flesh is the problem. The child of God should not, they're to abstain from fleshly desires. They should not put themselves in places or situations that will provide for the desires of the sinful nature. That's an act of foolishness. Notice in Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs 4. Verses 14 and verse 15. Enter not into the path of the wicked. Why? Because you have within you that which desires wickedness. So don't go into the path of the wicked. Go not in the way of evil men. That is, abstain from it. Verse 15. Avoid it. It's not get as close to it as you can. It's avoid it. Avoid the path of the wicked. Avoid the way of evil men. Pass not by it. You do not go near it. This is very plain. Turn from it. Okay, so as you walk in the world, you may avoid the path of the wicked. You may not go near it, but you just walking the course of the world, just living life. There it is. There it is. It's there. You didn't purposely put yourself there, but there it is. What do? Turn from it. Get out of there. That's what Joseph did. And pass away. So, wisdom teaches us, because we know what's within. We know what's within. Satan is going to use what is within. That's what he's going to attack, our sinful desires. So we have to avoid these things. Then notice over in Proverbs 6, verses 27 and 28. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one go upon hot coals and his feet not be burned. In other words, avoid sin. Avoid that which will bring temptation into our lives. Avoid it. Stay away from it. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, 1 Timothy chapter 6, and verse 9. But they that will be rich. Okay, now notice what it says. It doesn't say they that are rich. That's not what it says. They that will be rich. That means they have a desire to be rich. They have within them a desire to be rich. There's that desire. I'm talking about temptation that comes from within. Temptation that comes from ourselves. They that will be rich fall into temptation. They have this desire to be rich, and they fall into temptation. It doesn't say they might. It says they do. They fall into temptation and a snare or a trap, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts or desires. So they have this desire to be rich, and this brings on temptation, it brings on traps, and they fall into many other foolish and hurtful desires. All from this one desire, to be rich, which drown men in destruction and perdition. So, stay away from that which tempts to sin. We read in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, evil communications corrupt good manners. Evil communications corrupt good manners because of what's within us. That's the problem. That's the problem. Temptation's not the problem, because it would not be temptation if it were not for the desires that are within. So we need to keep that in mind. Looking at the sources of temptation. Temptation comes from within. Now, having said that, temptation can come from others. Other people can bring temptation into our lives. But they would not be able to do so if it were not for the sinful desires that are within. So you can't blame it on anyone. Even if someone else brings temptation in your life, you say, well, they're tempting me. Well, why are you tempted? Because you have those desires within. That's the root problem. That's what we want to keep stressing. So, temptation can come from others. In Acts 26, verse 11, Paul, reviewing his life before salvation, referring to the Christians that he arrested, he said, I compelled them to blaspheme. That is, I tempted them to blaspheme. And it was the desire to save their own necks that would cause some of them to blaspheme. Again, would be no temptation if you can just take away the desire. So temptation can come from others. Therefore, the children of Israel were warned. Notice in Deuteronomy chapter 7, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 2 through 4. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them, talking about the Canaanites. Thou shalt make no covenant with them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. Here's why. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. Because there is temptation from others, we're giving these instructions. But again, we could not be tempted from others if it were not for what's within us. Then, of course, temptation can come from circumstances. Notice in the book of Joshua, chapter 7, in verse 20, and Achan answered Joshua and said, Indeed, I have sinned against the Lord God of Israel, and thus have I done. And then notice his explanation. When I saw, this is circumstances, and circumstances became a temptation. And they became a temptation because of what was in Achan. When I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight. Nothing wrong with seeing these things. But he not only saw them, he stared at them. He beheld them. Well, how do you know that? Well, 200 shekels of silver. He obviously took careful notice. And a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight. I saw. And then the next problem, then, after I saw, not just merely a glance, but I studied them, I coveted them. I desired them. That came from within. And took them. I saw, I coveted, I took. And behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. So Achan found himself in a circumstance that proved to be a temptation to him. But were it not for his desire for those things, wouldn't have been a problem. Again, that's what's within is the root problem. But the child of God must not deliberately put themselves into circumstances that are going to make provision for the lusts of the flesh. People will say foolish things. They'll say, well, I can do such and such, and I might be tempted, but I won't fall. Well, you're a fool. You don't know yourself. You don't know the power of fleshly desires. You know how many people have said that through history and have fallen? You just do not make provision for the flesh, because the flesh is the problem. And then temptation can come from Satan. And, of course, Matthew 4, verse 3, 1 Thessalonians 3, 5, he is the tempter. He's called the tempter because that's what he does. He tempts. That is, he provokes to wrong action. First Chronicles chapter 21. First Chronicles 21, verse 1. And Satan stood up against Israel. He stands up against Israel as an enemy. And he provoked David. He didn't make David, he provoked him. That is, he tempted him. What did he tempt him to do? To number Israel. That is, to count his soldiers. You say, well, I don't see what the big deal is. Well, it was a big deal. And because it showed unbelief. It showed a lack of trust in God. But the point is, Satan provokes to wrong action. Why does he do that? Why does Satan tempt us in one area? To get an advantage in that area so that he can advance to the next area. Satan is never interested in you and I committing just one sin. Never. And he does not have just one person in mind when he's tempting that person. He has everybody in mind that's associated with them now and in the future. He's the tempter. He seeks to get an advantage over the individual. 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. And every advantage that he gets is for another temptation. For another temptation. He seeks to steal the seed of God's Word so that it does not find lodgment in our hearts. We read that in Luke 8:13. Why? To tempt, to lead us into sin. He endeavors to turn people aside from the things of the Lord. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 15. He's a great tempter. He has wiles to deceive. Ephesians 6, verse 11. He has snares to entrap. 1 Timothy 3, 7. 2 Timothy 2, 26. He is diligent in everything that he does. Satan doesn't do anything half-heartedly. He's diligent in everything that he does. And again, he does not merely confine himself to one sort of temptation. Every temptation leads to another. That's Satan's method. If he finds that one method of temptation does not prevail, he never runs out of methods. He doesn't come up with new methods. He doesn't need to. The same old methods that he used in the garden, he still uses today. Why? Because they work. They work because of our human nature. And he knows that. He knows how to tempt. He knows how to tempt each individual, making use of individual tendencies. He knows how to tempt. He knows when to tempt, and he knows at what point to tempt the individual. Many people have the false notion that Satan is going to attack our weakness. Yeah, he will. But don't forget about your strength. He'll attack that too. You'll be concentrating on what you perceive as your weakness and what you perceive as your strength. It's not untouchable. It's not untouchable. Satan will go after it. He'll just chip away, chip away, chip away. And pretty soon that strength is no longer strength. Again, he never has one person in mind. He never has one sin in mind. And as we saw in the garden, he seeks to cast doubt. That's one of Satan's greatest tactics. He seeks just to cast doubt. And he seeks to remove God as Lord, just as he did in the garden. He suggests to us that there's really no real danger here. People are overreacting. The preacher's overreacting. There's really no danger here. That is a ploy of Satan. And again, we could go into great detail concerning the methods of Satan's temptations, but that's not our point. We are to avoid, we are to pray that God would prevent us from going in the way of that which is going to prove to be a temptation. Stay away from it. Make not provision for the flesh. Back in Proverbs chapter 5, Solomon's writing concerning the lips of a strange woman. He says in verse 3. And then he describes her. But what we want to notice is verse 8. He's talking to his son. He says, remove thy way far from her. Get away from her. Don't go near her. And come not nigh the door of her house. You don't go near it. Notice in Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs 7. He's talking about, he's looking in verse 6 through the window, through his window of his house, and he's looking out in the street. In verse 7, and behold, among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding, passing through the street, near, that's the problem. Passing through the street's not the problem. Passing through the street near her corner. And then what did he do next? And he went the way to her house. And you can read on there that, and then with verse 21, with her much fair speech, she caused him to yield. Yield to what? His desires. His desires. With the flattering of her lips, she forced him. Stay away. Lead us not into temptation. Then there is a prayer here in Matthew 6 for delivering grace. Deliver us from evil. It has the sense of rescue us from sin. The word evil is really always descriptive of the character of sin. It's descriptive of the character of sin. That which is evil is wicked. It's disagreeable. It's contrary to God and God's standards of what is right. We read in Psalm 51 and 4 that there's such a thing as evil acts. And then, of course, we get back to the root problem. Within us is evil. Paul said in Romans 7, verse 21, when I would do good, evil is present with me. And that is what makes us an object of temptation. Evil is present with me. Even when I desire to do good, there's that evil seed within. So really, this is deliver us from evil could be looked at as also a prayer to be delivered from ourself. Delivered from self. Because if it weren't for self, we couldn't be tempted. So consider, again, back in Matthew 6, consider the spirit of this request. The whole teaching of Christ upon prayer is speaking about our spirit in prayer. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. What is the spirit of the one who prays that? Well, it's the prayer of one who is fearful of temptation to do evil. There needs to be a fear, not just for sin, but a fear of temptation. A fear of temptation. The one who is, this is the Spirit is one who is fearful of the very temptation to sin. And if you're fearful enough, you don't put yourself in those positions. It is the prayer of one who is painfully aware of their proneness to temptation. Painfully aware of their human nature. Painfully aware of what is in them. Evil is present with me. It is the prayer of one who is also painfully aware of their own inability to successfully recognize and resist temptation. One of our biggest problems, and Satan uses it, is we don't even recognize when we're being tempted sometimes. Don't even recognize it. It is the prayer of one who is aware of the danger of temptation. If there is temptation, if there is a desire within me, then there is a chance that I will succumb to it. Beware of saying, "Well, I would never do that." You better be careful. You better be careful. The prayer of one who desires to avoid all occasions to sin. You cannot play with temptation. You cannot play with sin. You cannot dance around a pit. Eventually you're going to slip. You're going to fall into that pit. If you don't go near the pit, you don't have to worry about falling into it. So again, avoid it. Avoid it. It is the prayer of one who realizes the awfulness of sin. Realizes that sin is a very serious matter. It is the prayer of one who is careful. They have a carefulness about them. Not to commit sin. Not to wander into temptation. Not to put themselves into temptation. Paul said, walk circumspectly, not as fools. Walk very, very carefully. And if we realize what is within us, and we realize the world that we live in, and all the sources of temptation, you'll be careful. Walk circumspectly. Can a child of God be too careful? I don't think so. I don't think so. So walk circumspectly. So to pray this, what we see here, it means that we are vigilant against temptation. Most people never give much thought to the dynamics of temptation. Again, James chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. And are therefore careless about the matter of temptation. Proverbs 4:23, the heart must be guarded at all times. Pay attention to the heart. That's what Satan is after. Pay attention to the condition of your heart. Give all diligence. All diligence. That is, make it a priority and persevere in keeping the heart, which is part of Colossians 3 verse 5, mortifying the flesh. Putting sinful desires away. We're to flee, as Joseph did in Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12. We're to flee all occasions to sin. We are to resist the very first motions of temptation. The very first motions. Because each act of non-resistance weakens whatever resistance we have. Satan knows that. So you have to resist the very first motions of temptation. Notice Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4. Verse 27. Neither give place to the devil. You do not give him space. You do not give space to the devil. You do not give place to the devil, because whatever you give him, he'll take much more. He'll take much more. He's not only going to take what you give him. Don't be foolish. James chapter 4. James chapter 4. Verse 7. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil. Resist him. How do you do that? Submit yourself to God. That's how you do it. That's how you resist the devil. And he will flee from you. Oh, he'll be back. He'll be back. But if you submit yourselves to God in resisting him, he will flee. He's coming back, and you better be ready. But again, resist the first motions. 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter 5. Verses 8 and 9. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Whom resist. Steadfast. Here's how you resist. Here's your position in resisting. Steadfast in the faith. Steadfast in the faith. Knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. And then he goes down and mentions the God of all grace. That's where our power to resist comes from. And then lastly, in 1 Corinthians 10, we have this promise. Again, we are to pray that God would help us. God would prevent us from going in the direction of that which is going to lead to sin. And in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 13, there hath no temptation taken you. In other words, no temptation has come upon you, but such as is common to man. You're not the only one. Whatever the temptation is, sometimes you may think, well, I'm the only one that has this temptation. No, that's not so. Whatever solicitations to sin come upon us, has come upon others, and has been resisted by others, and endured by others. And then notice, but God is faithful. There's the key. God is faithful. He is true to His promise. no matter what the situation. And then we see there is a God limit to temptation that comes upon us. Who, that's faithful God, will not suffer or permit you individually to be tempted above that ye are able. So the temptation, by God's faithfulness to us, is never more than can be borne by us. That's what it says. That's a wonderful promise. So when someone says, I had to, that's a lie. You didn't have to. I couldn't resist. No, that's just not so. God is faithful. And when you say something like that, you're calling into question the faithfulness of God. And then notice there is a God provision. But He will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but He will do something. And then notice that next word because it's very important. With. But will with the temptation. It's not going to do me much good if it comes after the temptation. It comes with. But will with the temptation. Also. That is, in addition to not giving you more than you can bear, also to make a way to escape. So with every temptation, with that temptation, with the temptation, there's an escape. It's there. It's there. You can't say, but there's no way I could get out of it. That's not so. God is faithful. And with the temptation, He provides a way to escape. Why does He do that? That ye may be able to bear it. To bear what? The temptation. To endure. To outlast, if you will, the temptation. It's a wonderful promise. We have the support of God. There are temptations. We're tempted from within. We're tempted by circumstance. But everything comes back to this root problem. Our sinful desires. Our sinful desires. And that's what Satan preys upon. Our sinful flesh. But we have support. We have support of God. And God enables His children to endure temptation. So when we pray, we ought to have the spirit of one who is fearful of sin. It follows asking for forgiveness of sin. So we've been forgiven. Now you have to fear that you're going to fall into sin again. And perhaps the very same sin. Again and again and again. So you pray, Lord, lead us not into temptation. That is, protect us from that which leads to sin. Deliver us from evil. We have to realize the only way to be victorious is to depend upon Him. That's the only way. Cannot do it in your own strength. Brother Ben, if you'll come and lead us